The termination letter felt like ice. 20 years at Cygnus Systems evaporated by a single sterile word: redundancy. A lie. Across the boardroom table, Liam, the kid I'd trained from an intern, my apprentice, sat in my chair. He avoided my gaze, staring out at the Seattle rain streaking down the panoramic window. He was 25, ambitious and utterly clueless. Elias, our director, said, his voice a flat line, "Liam's new efficiencies have made your role obsolete." Liam finally looked at me, a flicker of triumph in his eyes before he masked it with faux sympathy. He had no idea. He thought he'd inherited a kingdom. He'd actually just been handed the keys to a time bomb, and I was the only person on Earth who knew the code to disarm it. I walked out of Cygnus Tower for the last time, the Seattle drizzle clinging to my coat like a shroud. My personal effects fit in a single cardboard box, a pathetic summary of a 20-year career. It wasn't just a job. It was my architecture. My creation. I called the core system Nightingale. It was more than just infrastructure. It was a living, breathing network I'd built from scratch, full of elegant workarounds and undocumented shortcuts. Liam saw the clean interface, the seamless performance. He didn't see the patches over the patches, the digital scar tissue holding it all together. Specifically, he didn't know about the Cascade Protocol, a failsafe I built in after a near-catastrophic data breach a decade ago. It wasn't in any manual. It was a kill switch, a hard reset that only I knew how to bypass. Without that bypass, a specific type of server stress wouldn't just cause a slowdown. It would trigger a system-wide data purge, a corporate extinction event. I'd taught Liam how to make Nightingale sing. I never taught him about its ghosts. He thought my knowledge was obsolete. He was about to learn it was the only thing keeping his kingdom from turning to ash. Liam arrived 6 years ago, fresh out of university with a sharp mind and a hunger that reminded me of myself at his age. He wasn't just an intern. He was a project. My project. I saw the raw talent beneath his nervous energy. He didn't just want a job. He wanted to understand the machine, to feel its rhythm. I brought him into Nightingale's inner sanctum, showing him the code pathways I'd laid down like poetry. "This architecture, it's unconventional," he'd said once, tracing a data flow diagram on a monitor. "It's resilient," I corrected him. "It's built to withstand chaos, not just operate in calm." I told him stories of the old network, the pre-Nightingale era. I even told him about the 2013 breach, the one that nearly sank the company. The night we almost lost everything. For 72 straight hours, fueled by black coffee and sheer terror, I'd coded a patch that walled off the intruders and saved our client data. It was in the aftermath of that firestorm, hidden from the board and their inevitable cost-cutting inquiries, that I built the Cascade Protocol. It wasn't a feature, it was a scar, a reminder, a final desperate line of defense that should never be needed. I never told him its name or its true function. It was a secret born of crisis, too dangerous to document, too vital to forget. Our bond was forged in server rooms, over late-night takeout and complex problem-solving. He was the son I never had. I thought I was building a successor. He was just taking notes for a coup. The change was subtle at first. About a year ago, his questions shifted. They were less about how and more about why. "Why do we need these manual checks, Elias? I could write a script to automate this." He started calling my methods legacy. He'd pitch streamlined solutions in meetings, glossing over the fail-safes he didn't understand. He saw my caution not as wisdom, but as a bottleneck. He presented my life's work as a dusty relic, and himself as the modern savior. He used the very knowledge I gave him to craft a narrative. He learned the song from me, then convinced the board he'd written the symphony. He'd point to the elegant workarounds I had built. "These are inefficient," he'd argue to the director. "Crutches for an outdated system. I can replace them." And they listened. They saw a cheaper salary and heard a prettier song, not realizing he was dismantling the earthquake-proofing because he'd never felt a tremor. He didn't just take my job. He used my own expertise, twisted it, and fashioned it into the weapon that executed me. The first real tremor hit during a quarterly review 3 months ago. We were in the main conference room, the one with the polished mahogany table that reflected our tired faces. Liam was presenting a cost analysis report he'd initiated himself. On the big screen, he pulled up a diagram of Nightingale's core data routing. My diagram. As you can see, he said, his voice smooth and confident, we have multiple redundant data pathways. These were necessary for the system's initial stability, but with modern hardware and my new predictive balancing algorithms, they're now just expensive dead weight. He gestured to a section of the diagram that glowed red. It was the very section that shunted traffic away from the sensitive servers linked to the Cascade protocol. Those aren't dead weight, Liam, I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. They're load-bearing walls. They manage stress during peak traffic events. You remove them, you risk data packet collision on a scale we haven't seen in a decade. Liam gave me a patient, condescending smile. The kind you give a grandparent who doesn't understand how to use a smartphone. With all due respect, Elias, that's an outdated perspective. My algorithms anticipate the stress before it happens. It's proactive, not reactive. We're talking about a 15% reduction in server maintenance costs, Mr. Sterling. All eyes turned to the director. Sterling, a man who saw everything in terms of profit and loss, leaned forward, his interest piqued. 15%? I saw it then. The checkmate. I couldn't explain the real danger without revealing a classified protocol born from a corporate near-death experience, a secret only myself and the long-retired CEO knew about. To them, my warning sounded like the ramblings of a man afraid of being replaced by automation. Liam knew this. He had cornered me perfectly. Later that week, I caught him in the server room, rerouting a fiber-optic cable. You know what you're doing, don't you? I said, keeping my voice low. He didn't turn around, just continued to neatly fasten a zip tie. I'm making the system better, Elias, more efficient. You're pulling Jenga blocks from the bottom of the tower to build a prettier spire on top. It looks impressive until the whole thing comes down. He finally faced me. The apprentice mask was gone. His eyes were cold, hard chips of ice. Maybe the tower needs to fall so something better can be built in its place, he said. You built it for your time. I'm building it for the future. The final act was his masterpiece of corporate theater. He identified a series of my manual diagnostic routines. Routines I ran weekly to check for the specific precursor signals of a cascade event, and he automated them. He wrote a sleek script that ran in 5 minutes, replacing my 2-hour-long meticulous process. He presented it to the board as the Vance redundancy solution, a final poetic twist of the knife. They gave him a standing ovation. They loved the efficiency. They loved the name. What his script actually did was blind the system. It reported everything as normal, always. It was a digital coat of paint over a cracked foundation. He hadn't just taken my job. He had methodically, piece by piece, dismantled my life's work in front of an applauding audience. He turned my caution into cowardice, my experience into obsolescence. And in his arrogance, he'd armed a doomsday clock, set it to tick, and then smashed the face so no one could see the time. I didn't storm home and smash things. I didn't drown my sorrows in whiskey or frantically search for lawyers. Instead, a profound and unnerving calm settled over me. I unpacked my box of personal effects, placing a framed photo of my late wife on the mantelpiece. Revenge, I realized, wasn't a firestorm. It was a tide. You don't force it. You simply wait for it to come in. For the first week, I did nothing. I read novels I hadn't had time for in years, walked along the shores of Puget Sound, and let the gray Seattle sky wash over me. I wasn't biding my time. I was savoring it. I didn't need to hack into Cygnus. I didn't need to plant a virus. Liam had already done the work for me. He'd meticulously laid the dynamite, lit the fuse, and was now standing on top of it, waving a flag of victory. My only job was to be out of the blast radius. I considered calling Frank Sterling, the director. I could lay it all out for him, the Cascade protocol, the imminent danger. But the thought died as quickly as it came. They wouldn't believe me. They'd see it as the desperate plea of a bitter old man. Liam had poisoned that well completely. No, my silence was the true weapon. Liam built his throne on the lie that my knowledge was worthless. The only way to prove its value was to let him face a problem he couldn't solve. He wanted the crown. He would have to bear its weight when it came crashing down. The catalyst came a week later, disguised as good news. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah, a junior tech from my old team, her voice a mix of awe and anxiety. "Elias? Hi, hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all, Sarah. What's up?" "It's crazy here," she whispered, like she was afraid of being overheard. "Liam just closed the Omnicorp deal. They're migrating their entire cloud infrastructure to our servers, starting Friday." Omnicorp, the white whale. The biggest data hosting contract in the Pacific Northwest. I'd told Liam for years that Nightingale couldn't handle that kind of instantaneous data load without a 6-month structural upgrade. It was the exact type of server stress I'd designed the Cascade Protocol's bypasses to prevent. "He's telling everyone the system's new efficiencies can handle it," Sarah continued, her voice strained. "He says it'll be a seamless transition, a new era for Cygnus. He's a rock star, Elias." "I'm sure he is," I said, my voice perfectly level. "A new era. An extinction event. Same difference." After we hung up, I walked to the calendar on my kitchen wall. With a red marker, I drew a neat, precise circle around this coming Friday. Then, I put the kettle on for tea. The tide was coming in. The days leading up to Friday weren't spent in anxious waiting. They were spent in methodical preparation. The rage had cooled into something far more dangerous: purpose. On Monday, I spent 6 hours at the public library, not reading fiction but poring over business and corporation law. On Tuesday, I filed the paperwork online. By Wednesday afternoon, I was the sole proprietor and CEO of a brand new consulting firm. I named it Ethelred Consulting. Ethelred the Unready. An old English king, famous for being poorly advised. It was a private joke, but one that felt deeply, exquisitely appropriate. My strategic move wasn't about sabotage. It was about positioning. When the tidal wave hit Cygnus, I wouldn't be a desperate, unemployed man begging for his job back. I would be the only licensed marine rescue specialist on the entire coast, and my services would not be cheap. On Thursday, the day before the Omnicorp migration, I made one phone call. Arthur Kensington was 82 years old, living in a quiet retirement community on Bainbridge Island. He was the CEO who had hired me 25 years ago, and the only other living soul who knew the true story of the 2013 breach and the secret I'd buried in the system to prevent a repeat. He answered on the second ring, his voice still carrying the familiar, gravelly authority. "Elias, this is a surprise. I trust you're not calling to tell me my pension has evaporated." "Not yet, Arthur," I said, allowing a small smile. "I'm calling out of professional courtesy. As of 2 weeks ago, I'm no longer with Cygnus." There was a silence on the line, but it wasn't empty. It was the sound of a sharp mind processing information. "Sterling's decision?" His name was on the letter. "And who's watching the henhouse now?" Arthur asked, the question sharp as a needle. "The very capable Liam," I replied, my voice neutral. "He's assured the board my methods are obsolete. In fact, he's migrating Omnicorp's entire infrastructure onto Nightingale tomorrow. A bold move." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear the gears turning, connecting my departure with the high-stakes data migration. He knew what I wasn't saying. He knew Nightingale's ghosts. "Ethelred the Unready," Arthur said, his voice a low murmur. My blood went cold for a second. "I'm sorry." "King of England at the turn of the first millennium." His name didn't mean unprepared. The Old English word, unrayed, meant ill-advised. He was a king who received bad counsel. Arthur let the history lesson hang in the air. "I assume you're not calling for advice, Elias." "No, sir, just informing you I've started my own consulting firm. I thought you, of all people, might appreciate the venture." "I see," he said, and I knew he did. He saw the entire chessboard. "Well, Elias, I wish you the best of luck in your new endeavor. And should you need a reference—" He trailed off, the implication clear. "Thank you, Arthur. That means a lot." We ended the call. The seed was planted. I hadn't asked for help. I hadn't revealed a thing. I had simply armed a former king with the knowledge that the current court was being run by a fool. When the castle walls began to crack, Arthur Kensington would know exactly which stonemason to call. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my study. The city lights of Seattle, a distant, glittering smear across the water. On one monitor, I had a simple network traffic analyzer running, pointed at Cygnus's public-facing IP block. It was a crude tool, like trying to gauge the health of a whale by watching the ripples on the ocean's surface, but it would tell me what I needed to know. It would show me the first signs of the fever. The second monitor was blank, save for a single document I'd typed up. A 3-page master services agreement for Ethelred Consulting. The terms were simple: a staggering hourly rate, a 24-hour minimum engagement, and a clause granting me complete, unassailable administrative authority over any system I was contracted to repair. It was a king's ransom, a document of beautiful, glorious arrogance. Friday morning arrived with a pale, watery sun. 8 a.m. I made coffee. 9 a.m. The Omnicorp migration would be starting. I watched the traffic graph. A gentle, expected rise. Liam would be in the boardroom right now, a picture of calm confidence, his laptop plugged into the main display, showing off the seamless data flow. He'd be accepting congratulations. He would feel like a god. For 2 hours, the graph remained stable. The system was holding. Liam's new algorithms, his efficiencies, were managing the initial load. For a moment, a sliver of doubt entered my mind. Had I been wrong? Had he, through sheer dumb luck and modern hardware, actually built something that could withstand the strain? Then, at 11:17 a.m., I saw it. A flicker. A tiny, almost imperceptible spike on the latency chart. A single dropped packet in a sea of billions. To anyone else, it was static. To me, it was the cry of a single bird, warning of the coming tsunami. The system had begun to compensate, shunting data. But Liam had torn down the load-bearing walls. The data had nowhere to go. It was now being routed directly towards the servers that housed the Cascade Protocol's trigger. The Jenga tower was wobbling. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I leaned back in my chair. My phone was on the desk beside the keyboard, face up, screen dark. It was silent. For now. The time for moves was over. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. All I had to do now was wait for the king to fall. The flicker became a tremor. By 11:30 a.m., the latency graph was no longer aligned with occasional spikes. It was a frantic, jagged saw blade. Data packets were being dropped not in ones and twos, but in entire blocks. I could feel the system fighting itself. Nightingale was having a stroke. The elegant, self-correcting architecture I'd built was being choked by the very efficiencies Liam had introduced. He had silenced the warning bells, and now the core was melting down in terrifying silence. I could picture the scene at Cygnus with perfect clarity, the celebratory mood in the boardroom evaporating. A junior technician, maybe Sarah, pointing at a monitor with a trembling finger. The initial confusion giving way to a cold, creeping dread. And Liam. I could see Liam, his face pale, frantically typing commands into his laptop, his confident facade cracking with every failed diagnostic. He'd be telling everyone it was a minor glitch, an external DDoS attack, anything but the truth. He was flying a plane he didn't know how to land. He was seeing the ghost in the machine for the first time, and it was staring right back at him. At 12:05 p.m., my phone rang. The caller ID read, Cygnus Systems main line. Not Liam's cell, not Sterling's. A general number. They were hiding. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my voice calm and even. Hello? Elias? Thank God! It's Frank Sterling. His voice was tight, stretched thin over a wire of panic. We have a situation. A big one. The Omnicorp data. It's not just slow, it's vanishing. We're getting data right corruption across the board. I see, I said, as if he were describing a patch of bad weather. Liam, the boy can't get a handle on it. He doesn't know what's happening. Listen, Elias, whatever our differences, I need you back here. Right now, name your price. This was the moment, the culmination of 20 years of expertise and 2 weeks of calculated silence. Mr. Sterling, I said, my tone shifting from casual to clinical. I am no longer an employee of Cygnus Systems. My price is irrelevant. However, my firm, Ethelred Consulting, is available for emergency contracts. A pause. I could hear muffled shouting in the background. Sterling came back on the line, his voice strained. Your firm? Elias, this is no time for games. I assure you, this isn't a game. This is a level 5 system integrity failure. You have approximately 90 minutes before the Cascade Protocol initiates a full data purge. I am the only person who can stop it. The mention of the protocol's name was like a defibrillator to his chest. He gasped. I heard him shout my words across the room. More shouting. Someone must have gotten Arthur Kensington on the phone. The old king was now whispering in the new king's ear. What are your terms? Sterling asked, his voice now stripped of all bluster. He was a drowning man asking for a life raft. I am emailing you a master services agreement now, I said, attaching the document I'd prepared. The terms are on page 2. They are, of course, non-negotiable. You'll need to sign and return it before I can begin. I hit send. The silence on his end was profound. I knew he was looking at the hourly rate, a number so audacious it was insulting. He was looking at the 24-hour minimum, the clause granting me total, unchecked authority. It wasn't a contract. It was a surrender document. Elias, this is, he stammered, it's the price of keeping your company from becoming a memory. I finished for him. As I said, you have, at this point, 88 minutes. I didn't wait for a reply. I hung up. The power wasn't in the conversation. It was in the silence that followed. For 10 agonizing minutes, my inbox remained empty. I watched the traffic graph flatline in sections. Entire server banks were going dark. He was losing Nightingale piece by piece. Liam was watching his kingdom crumble to dust. Then, at 12:17 p.m., exactly 1 hour after the first flicker, a new email appeared in my inbox. The sender was Frank Sterling. The subject line contained a single word, agreed. Attached was my contract, digitally signed. I didn't smile. I stood up, walked to my closet, and took out my best suit, the one I'd saved for special occasions. I put on my tie, knotting it with slow, deliberate precision. I was no longer the discarded employee. I was Ethelred Consulting. And I was going to work. The drive to Cygnus Tower was the calmest I'd felt in years. I didn't park in the general lot. I pulled my modest sedan into the reserved space for visiting executives, right by the front entrance. The security guard who'd watched me carry my box out 2 weeks ago now held the door for me, his eyes wide. The boardroom was a tomb of silent panic. The panoramic view of Seattle was a bitter irony, a beautiful backdrop to an ugly corporate death. Sterling and the other executives stood clustered like frightened sheep. And at the head of the polished mahogany table, in my old chair, sat Liam. He wasn't the confident usurper anymore. He was a boy, pale and hollowed out, staring at a main screen filled with cascading red error logs. He looked up as I entered, and his face, a mask of terror and shame, was the first installment on a debt I was there to collect. I walked past Sterling without a word, placing my briefcase on the table. My eyes never left Liam. The triumph I'd seen in his gaze weeks ago was gone, replaced by the vacant stare of total defeat. He had inherited the kingdom and, in his arrogance, burned it to the ground in a single morning. You said my methods were obsolete, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. You streamlined my work. You automated my expertise. You took my chair. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Get up. He flinched as if struck. For a moment, he didn't move, frozen by the sheer weight of his failure. Sterling opened his mouth to say something, but I raised a single finger, silencing him without looking away from Liam. Get up, I repeated, my voice dropping to a low, cold command. Slowly, like a man twice his age, Liam rose from the chair. He couldn't meet my gaze. He looked at the floor, at the wall, anywhere but at the man whose life's work he'd destroyed, and who was now the only thing standing between him and oblivion. I sat down in some chair and opened my briefcase. I didn't look at the dying system yet. I looked at the broken protégé I had trained. "Now," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "Go get me a coffee. Black." What would you do in my situation? When they inevitably call begging for help, do you charge them an insane consulting fee, or do you just let the whole system crash and burn?